The Age of Surveillance Capitalism by Shoshana Zuboff was published in 2019 and is a sharp and well-executed assault on contemporary privacy conducts, breaches, and abuses by tech giants as Google and Facebook. In the first part of the book, The Foundations of Surveillance Capitalism, which is majorly concerned with the origins and circumstances of this new form of digital dominance, Zuboff claims that the internet and the algorithmic profiling through data analytics of all of its users has been compromised by what she calls surveillance capitalism. Surveillance capitalism unilaterally claims human experience as free raw material for translation into behavioral data. Although some of these data are applied to product or service improvement, the rest are declared as proprietary behavioral surplus, fed into advanced manufacturing processes known as machine intelligence, and fabricated into prediction products that anticipate what you will do now, soon, and later. Finally, these prediction products are traded in a new kind of marketplace for behavioral predictions that I call behavioral futures markets. What this means is that with each interaction on the web, like browsing, searching, buying, or liking, we are leaving not just a visible digital footprint, but also an invisible behavioral surplus, metadata of our interaction that contains our location, the specific time, information of who else was there, and so on. This behavioral surplus was in the late 1990s by many companies such as AOL or Microsoft considered useless data exhaust. But Google saw that if behavioral data was stored, linked, contextualized, and fed into machine learning systems, it could actually improve its services in giving more accurate results to what users were searching for. Yet in the early 2000s, the dot-com crash drove many tech firms into bankruptcy, and even Google wasn't safe at that time as they still weren't able to adopt an effective monetizing strategy to return money to their investors. Eventually, Google would find out that they could use the behavioral surplus which they were using for service optimization to create profiles and link them to advertisements. Advertisers would no longer try to intercept users, but users were directly led to advertisements that were in a way corresponding to their profile. Google would no longer mine behavioral data strictly to improve services for users, but rather to read users' minds for the purposes of matching ads to their interests, as those interests are deduced from the collateral traces of online behavior. Google's discovery, rendering of behavioral surplus for commercial purposes, enabled them to expand at an unprecedented scale, comparable to Henry Ford's enterprise and revolutionized method of production. Google, on the other hand, revolutionized extraction. Zuboff stresses on what she calls the extraction imperative to be a fundamental pillar of the logic of surveillance capitalism. But besides that, there were other crucial factors that enabled Google to grow and dominate the digital landscape for the last 2 decades. One being Western neoliberal ideology, another second modernity needs, and another their collaboration with the US government. When Zuboff speaks about neoliberal ideology, she refers to the way how Google was able to omit privacy rights and public concerns. Many courts and Western governments until recent saw no considerable threat in the practices of firms like Google or Facebook, as they were applying standard neoliberal market methods in the name of capitalism. However they were doing it, everyone was simply impressed by the services they provided, and that consequentialist logic seemed to work for many years. Another aspect Zuboff refers to, which she explicitly explains in the third part of the book, are second modernity needs. While first modernity needs were reflecting the pursuit of happiness and self-determination of most of the people born in the first 3 quarters of the 20th century, second modernity needs take happiness and self-determination for granted and strive mostly for self-expression and social comparison. These needs were adequately addressed by Google and Facebook. These companies provided the most efficient platforms for self-expression and social comparison. Besides the discovery of behavioral surplus, neoliberal ideology, and second modernity needs, Google, as the spearhead of surveillance capitalism, was fortified by the US government after 9/11 on behalf of the US's new agenda of surveillance exceptionalism. Google's mission was to organize and make accessible the world's information, and by late 2001, the intelligence community established information dominance in the public's house, quickly institutionalizing it in hundreds of billions of dollars worth of state-sponsored global technology infrastructure, personnel, and practice. The contours of a new interdependency between public and private agents of information dominance began to emerge, one that is best understood through the lens of what the sociologist Max Weber once called an elective affinity, born of a mutual magnetism that originates in shared meanings, interests, and reciprocities. The collaboration that began under the Bush administration to seize control over the internet through agencies like the NSA continued during the Obama campaign and started to use data analytics and Facebook to set agendas, influence, and communicate. During the Obama administration, a number of experts were drafted directly from Google and Silicon Valley into the government as advisors and informants. Yet, a question that Zuboff often raises during the book is, how did they pull that off? Why did companies like Google and Facebook get away with breaching our privacy, rendering behavioral data out of it, and selling it to the highest bidder? She explains that through the 4 stages of the dispossession cycle. She claims that surveillance capitalists like Google do never step away from their extraction imperative. With every new app or idea they develop, extracting data is their guiding principle. For example, when Google Street View was introduced, this was an unprecedented way to improve mapping the world. This was the first stage of the cycle, the incursion stage, in which new technologies are introduced. Yet, soon people found out that Street View cars were infiltrating networks and hijacking private data. In this second stage, the habituation stage, Google had to deny all allegations and come to a legal stalemate with courts until people accepted the fact that they were exploited. The habituation stage was basically a defensive war of Google that forced people to resign and consider the conduct of data extraction as something normal. Only then, when people resigned, Google would actually give in to allegations and adapt their technology to new regulations during the adaptation stage, which led to Google Street View disappearing in certain countries, for example. During this stage, Google also changed their rhetorics and promised that things like that will never happen again, leading to the redirection stage. In this stage, a new technology is introduced that masks the extraction imperative, leading the dispossession cycle to repeat once again. In that sense, governments and private users are always fooled from the beginning while Google accumulates more and more data. Zuboff closes the first part of the book with her concerns of what she calls the division of learning, a division that puts the user into a position of having access to different information than the people who host the information. While we believe knowledge is being democratized for us with having unlimited access to content on millions of platforms. The shadow text, which is turned into behavioral data and prediction products, has become a new kind of true knowledge about us to which only few have access. In this hidden movement, the competitive struggle over surveillance revenues reverts to the pre-Gutenberg order as the division of learning in society shades towards the pathological, captured by a narrow priesthood of privately employed computational specialists, their privately owned machines, and the economic interests for whose sake they learn.